I want to thank you all for coming over here. I hope you find this interesting. Well, how many of you have been to one of these talks over here last summer or the summer before? This is the third year. Okay, everybody else, if you can be patient, you'll hear a few things you've heard before. But the rest of you, this is the first time you've heard about what's going on in Burr Park, right? Okay. Let me start by telling you my name is Dave Weed. I work on a project called the Soames Heritage Area, and I can give you a brochure so you can find out more about that if you'd like. In the meantime, if you want to follow along with the handout here, we're going to talk about the people who used to live here. And can anybody tell me who used to live here? Nope. Indians. Okay. We sometimes call them Native Americans. They actually prefer to be called indigenous people. Indigenous means they were from the land originally here. Okay. Sometimes we call them first people because they were the first people to live here. All right. But you can also call them American Indians. What other kind of Indians are there?
I don't know.
Yeah?
Tribal Indians?
Well, think of India. Where's that?
In India.
Far away.
In India.
Far away, on the other side of the world. Those people are Indians too. Why do we call people here Indians? Anybody know?
Because they were born in India.
Because which?
They were born in India.
Well, because when the Europeans got here, they thought they were in India.
Really?
Boy, they didn't know where they were. Okay?
I just read it and it said this guy came
That's
from
why
London
I was
and he
always
was in
confused
Swansea.
why they were
That's
in
right.
There's somewhere in
How does
America.
Well, this
when
is
they-
Swansea, England then too.
Oh my God.
Okay,
I'm not a big
so
fan.
Indians have lived here for a long time. Anybody want to guess how long? Yeah?
Since the dinosaurs.
No. Stop being sarcastic.
Go ahead.
For once. So like over 100 years.
Oh, well over
Over
100
1,000?
years. How long?
165.
Oh, even longer than 165.
8,000.
Oh, 8,000, and actually there may have been people living here as long as 10 or even 12,000 years.
More than 8,000. Like
Right, more than 8,000. We
9,000.
know 8,000
Stop
because we
upstaging
found some of the tools from people 8,000 years ago. But there may have been people living here after the glaciers left here, after the glaciers melted. We used to have a mile of ice right where you're sitting. Can you imagine that?
Oh my God,
Frozen.
free ice
And
pellets.
I love ice.
you had to walk about 5 miles off the coast of where Newport is to even get to the ocean, because the ocean was a lot lower then because a lot of the water was trapped in these large glaciers. Well, those glaciers melted, and as they melted, people who were living in other parts of what's now the United States began moving here. Why did they come here?
Because they wanted
More water, yeah, to fish in, yeah, what else?
For a fresh start.
For a fresh start? What were people eating back then?
Fish.
Fish?
They would
Animals
eat
they could
corn.
Dinosaurs.
Whatever
Hogs,
animals they
yeah.
find, they would eat. Technically. Clams.
Clams?
Mussels.
What else? What lives in the woods here?
Deer.
Animals like
Deer.
deer,
Bears.
fish.
Rabbits.
rabbits, squirrels,
Catfish.
huh?
Humans.
All the
Fish,
dead
a
My
lot of
mom.
fish. So you're right, they came here because of food, all right?
chicken.
Back then, people had to move around in order to get their food. Okay, how do you get your food?
I use the
Open the
microwave and I hit up
There you
my
go.
Microwave.
And where do you get your food from?
My mom.
Stores.
Just thank you. Your
Your
store.
parents' money.
Yeah.
Hamburger helper.
I use my
You
mom
get
for
your food in stores, and where does the food in stores come from?
McDonald's.
Huh?
Stop and
Kind
shop.
of. Stop and shop.
I
Right.
just said that.
Factories.
You got a
Stores,
problem?
thank
It
you.
comes from
We
the
get
farm.
we get our food from factories and from farms that are a long ways away. So we bring our food to our houses, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then,
Had to
8,000
walk
years ago, how did people get their food? Yeah,
They went on a hunt.
they went on a hunt. They were hunters and gatherers. They went out in the woods and along the shore and out fishing, and they gathered their food that way. If you're gathering your food, do you want to stay in one place and bring all your food there? What would happen if you brought 50 fish into your Witu here?
You'll be like, oh my god, bro, I'll buy it for you.
You can't eat it all at one time, so what would happen to the fish?
It'll
decompose.
It would get rotten and you'd have to throw it away.
Well, it would be a good thing because you'd have.
That would just be a waste of fish.
What isn't
Well,
it called?
you
It's
could
called like
dry it and salt
like
it.
soil.
And
Yeah.
no, and it's the compost.
You could
I think it's
compost
called.
it and you could use
And
it
you could
on
use it
your,
to fertilize
for
your
fertilizing your
yeah.
plants.
You could
Very
use it to
good.
fertilize your plants.
But what people then did was to move around.
Nomads.
Okay? Yeah, they went where the food was. You might go into the woods and hunt the deer for a few months until there aren't any more deer. And then what do? You move. You go somewhere where there are more deer. Or you go over here to the coast and fish.
I would not
I feel like
Okay.
every time there's like a hunter,
Yep.
they overhunt.
They
so it kind
overhunt?
of takes from the population away.
Well, they didn't want to overhunt because there wouldn't be food when they came back. So they learned really well when to move, what times of the year to move, how long to stay. But if you're going to move, where's your house?
It's a
Wherever you
it's
move.
where it on your back or
Yeah,
something.
you
like
take it with
a
you.
few.
You have to
Right.
build it.
Have a
You
tent.
build it
Yeah,
where
put
you
your
are.
shoes
You're
on,
right.
Like Lincoln
nasty
loves.
feet.
Well, they you just look on your
They had
page
houses
here.
like
You
Legos.
see this picture
They
down
just took
here?
them apart.
Okay, see that picture? That's called a Witu, W-E-T-U, Witu. And that's a light, portable house that they could build just about anywhere where they were, because they made it out of bent saplings, young trees, and then cover it with bark or sometimes skins. All right?
Skin,
But
like,
they could move those Witus anytime they wanted.
Skin of
So if they went over to the woods in one place and hunted till the deer were beginning to leave or run out, they would simply move their Witu to another place. So that was a whole different way of living. Now what happened in 1620? Who knows their history? Okay.
I think it was Christopher Columbus.
No, he was here. He wasn't here. He was in this
Was it
part
the
of the
first
world.
Thanksgiving?
Pardon me?
Was it the first Thanksgiving?
There you go. Close.
Pilgrims
Who was?
came.
Yeah, they're pilgrims. Okay. Where did the pilgrims come from?
Scott
England.
Pilgrim?
Right. Well, actually, they came from Holland. They were from England. They lived in Holland for a couple of years, and then they came over here. But those were English people, even though they came from Holland directly. And they landed 40 miles away. Who's been to Plymouth Rock? Well,
Just kidding, no.
you want to go there soon because what's happening next year in Plymouth?
Thanksgiving.
They're knocking it down.
The what?
I don't know.
It's the 400th anniversary.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Pilgrims
yeah.
are that old?
16,
They're older than that.
1620 to 2020. Okay? So there will be all kinds of things going on in Plymouth next year. It's a good chance to learn more about the people who came here. So they came to Plymouth. Who was living right here at the time?
Native American.
Native Americans, and there was one in particular whose name we know very well.
Massasoit.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, that's the Massasoit.
I feel like
Okay.
there's another person. I think it's a mule.
Who is that?
Stop.
But while you think of it, let me explain. Massasoit isn't a name, it's a title, like president. Okay? So we say
Chief Keef.
President Nixon. Okay? Well, this is Massasoit. What was his name? I'll give you a clue. It's over on that monument.
I haven't read that.
Okay.
Chief Rock?
Its name was Osamequin. Actually,
That's hard to
Osu
remember.
meaning yellow, Mequin meaning feather. He was yellow feather. Okay, so he's the Massasoit Osamequin, right? He was living here, and he heard that the pilgrims had landed and brought women and children, so it looked like they were going to stay. So he waited a while because he didn't want to get sick like other people in this tribe had gotten from European diseases. And then went on March 22nd, 1621, and he met with them. How did he talk with them?
In England.
Did they speak English?
Yes.
Well, you were right the first
Indians
time.
didn't.
There were two Indians, Samoset and Tisquantum, who had learned some English, In fact, Tisquantum had been stolen, taken back to England a few years earlier, and spent several years in England and learned to speak English. Then they brought him back. So when the Massasoit wanted to meet with the Pilgrims, he had help from Tisquantum to translate. So they were able to talk to each other, and they developed a treaty, a peace treaty, so that they said, we won't harm you, you won't harm us, and we'll fight to protect each other from our common enemies. Does that make good sense? Yeah, but made good sense to the Massasoit who was living here because he had lost a lot of his people from disease. Anybody know what kind of illnesses were killing so many people?
Plague,
You've heard of it. Smallpox, that's one.
chickenpox,
Chickenpox could have been another.
Maybe the flu, yeah.
Maybe the flu. We don't know for sure. Could have been yellow fever. Could have been bubonic plague. Okay. Could have been measles. You've all heard about measles, right?
Disease.
Measles is a deadly disease if you're either old or young and you get a bad case of it. Okay. So people the native people who were living here were getting sick and dying before the Pilgrims came. So when the Massasoit saw that there were people who came over from England and had guns and cannons, right, which nobody had here, he could fight his enemies, the Narragansetts, very easily. So he entered into this treaty, and it lasted for his entire lifetime and kept the peace here for all that time. So the English people could thrive and survive and move into this land. What did this land look like back then?
Just a whole
Trees?
bunch of trees and water.
Huh?
mostly
Whole bunch
dirt.
of trees, water.
Whole bunch of trees. I
and
used to
huts.
think that that's the way it was. It was just all trees, like a big, thick
Trees,
forest,
tents, and
okay?
campfires.
But
There
guess
was
what?
there was not a lot of grass and stuff.
Well, I thought there wasn't a lot of grass,
Well,
but then
tall
I
grass.
found out that the native people, particularly along the coast here, used to burn the forest twice a year,
Just
in the
to keep
spring and in the summer. Why, are you shocked that they would set the forest on fire?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
the
at least they have
forests are
something in
actually
California.
designed to be burned because the burning kills off all the little stuff, all the little plants and stuff, the scrub, the stuff that makes it hard to walk through the woods. That burns off, but the big tall trees survive very well. They're built for that. And in fact, the fires get rid of insects and prepare the soil for new growth. So the Indians
there's a
learned that burning was a
wildfire in
good thing.
Carolina.
Pardon me?
When there's wildfires in, I think, Carolina.
Well, we could talk about wildfires. They're actually a good thing, but we've made them a bad thing by building houses in the woods, so we can't do that anymore. Okay? But back then there weren't any houses, remember, just we twos. And they learned that if they could clear the land and keep it open, it was easier to hunt. You could see a deer way through the woods like that because there wasn't all that underbrush underneath. So it was easier for them to hunt. And it was easier to travel. If you're going to walk everywhere, they didn't have horses, you had to walk everywhere. You want to walk through an area that looks like this and not an area full of brambles and thorns and everything else, right? So, when the English people got here and they found all this big open land, did they like that? Well, if you're English, what do you eat?
hotcakes and
Pardon me? Fish. What else?
I eat some lobster and crab.
Some lobster. You guys are all into seafood, aren't you?
Yeah,
But-
I get hibachi a lot.
What,
I want
when you go on a picnic, what meat do you eat?
I see food and I eat it.
Ham. What else?
Turkey.
Turkey. What else? How about hamburgers? Anybody eat hamburgers?
I eat
Cheeseburgers.
Where do hamburgers come from?
I don't like hamburgers.
And don't tell me a package.
Touch me hot dogs.
Make me.
Hot dogs, right. Where does that meat come from?
Animals.
Cows. Yeah.
cows,
Pigs.
deer,
Sheep.
veal.
Okay. Lambs, goats. Those are all what we call domesticated animals. Animals that people raise and feed and then slaughter to eat. Okay. Did the Indians do that?
No.
No. They went out in the woods and hunted. They never heard of people feeding their own animals. That was crazy. Okay. But when the English came and showed them that they raised their cattle, then the Indians were willing to sell their land so that the English people could move in and set up farms along here. Well, they did that at first, a few hundred, and then a few thousand, and then by 1675, 50,000 English people were living all around this area. Okay, what was happening to the Indian people, the native people? They were getting pushed away. What else?
Dying.
They were dying from the diseases that the English brought. If you lived in England and you had smallpox and you survived, then you were immune. You would never get it again. But if you were an Indian and you never had smallpox and you got a case of smallpox, chances are really good you're going to die. Okay, so lots of Indian people were dying here. Over 90% of the Indian people along the coast died before the Pilgrims got there. So many died that there were nothing but bones on the ground. Pardon me?
How did the Pilgrims survive?
Well, they had already survived from it. The ones that came over had been exposed. They were immune.
They died of natural causes too.
Now, they got sick from other things. You mentioned flu and things of that
Such as
sort.
natural causes.
But, well, they might have died of natural causes. Accidents and injury and infections were the things that most people died
like
from.
a really bad common cold.
Pardon me?
Like a really bad common cold.
Maybe a really bad cold, maybe, yeah.
Where's this from?
That's a wetu. That's the kind of house that people live in. That's down in Plymouth. You can see them down there. We don't have any here right now. But that's what people lived in around here, okay? So when the Europeans got here, then they were happy to move into the land, to bring their animals, their pigs and their cows, and let them graze, even though they were sometimes eating the corn that the Indians were planting. And they succeeded. They got more numerous. Meanwhile, the number of Indians was diminishing, going way down, until there was a war in 1675. Anybody know the name of the war?
World War II.
No, that was
World War III?
Oh, the
Pardon me?
Civil War.
Three?
Which one? King Philip's War. Thank you.
King Philip War.
1675, and that was a war that the native people started to drive the English back to England. They said, "We don't want you here anymore. Get out." And some of them did go back to England,
Wasn't that
and
like
some
the
of them
Civil
left the area. But over the course of that year, the English brought their troops, and they were able to defeat the native tribes here, and finally killed the Massasoit son, King Philip, down in Bristol. Okay, that ended the war. What happened to the Indian people after the war? You see a lot of Indian people living around here now? What happened to them all?
Died.
Some of them died. What else?
Some of them are just too old. They passed away from
Some of them may just have died. But if you were Indian and you'd started a war, what did the English people do to you?
Kill you. Not
They'd kill you,
They'll
sell
try
you
to.
into slavery, make you move out of the area. It was so bad that there was a law passed that if you were a Pokanoket native, okay, and you spoke the language or said, "I'm Pokanoket," and you were over the age of 12, who's 12 here? Anybody?
Hayden, raise your
Oh,
hand.
you're all safe then. If you were over the age of 12, they could shoot you on sight, kill you, just like that.
If you're 12,
If-
Well, yep.
If you were 12 years or older, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
If you're 12 or
was that a good place for Indian people to live? No. What would you do if they told you that? You'd leave. Get out of here, right? And that's what people did. So that's why you don't see Indian people now. But guess what? Many of them did survive. Many of them moved from the to other areas. Like the current chief of the tribe lives over in Barrington.
wait, he's still alive?
Oh yeah. Well, not from 400 years ago. This is the 10th chief since the Massasoit. Okay.
How old is he?
Pardon me?
How old is he?
He's 73 right now. Okay? So you have all kinds of people who were living here but didn't want to be known as Indian. So that's why you don't see people going around saying I'm Indian, right? But now we're bringing people from the tribe out. I don't have good pictures here, but if you go on the website, you'll see all kinds of pictures of the native tribe who still lives here today. There are about 300 of them, and they gather together every year, and they come and celebrate the man who's buried under that rock over there. Anybody know who's buried there? Nope.
Massasoit.
I'm sorry?
Massasoit?
The Massasoit? And who else?
His son? Philip?
No, Philip was drawn and quartered and his head was taken to Plymouth, so he's not here. Yep.
Yellow feathers?
That's the Massasoit's name, and we think he was buried here. Who else? Anybody else? 41 other people whose graves were dug up here in 1913 by a man who worked at the library named Charles Carr.
Are we sitting on dead bodies?
I'm sorry?
Are we sitting on dead bodies? Nope.
No, not now, because I'll tell you what happened though. He dug those up and sent not only the bodies, or it's just bones at that point, but he sent the things that they were buried with, dishes and knives and things like that, to museums. And then 20 years ago, a native woman from Mashpee, down on the Cape, went around and collected all that stuff from the museums because the federal law said she could do that. She could get burial items back. And then 2 years ago, they dug a big hole in the ground. You can see a picture of that right here. That's right under that monument over there. And they put a vault, a concrete vault in there, and they buried over 600 items that were taken from the 42 graves here. So they're back here. The Massasoit is back here, and hopefully he'll be here forever.
So if you dig that, we'll see that.
If you dug it up, if you started to dig it up, the police would be over here and arrest you. Okay? So nobody's supposed to dig that up. That's called desecration of a grave.
No,
all right?
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
If
right.
somebody dig that up,
Well, they put it in a sealed vault and so that no one will ever dig it up. Okay?
yeah.
That's the whole point.
I have a question. What's in the box?
What's in the vault?
No, in the
This box.
that box.
Well, I thought I'd bring a few English items over from the 1600s. This was very popular in the 1600s.
Can I keep it?
Can you keep it? What is this?
It's a
It's
mini
It's
golf
it's like
thing.
a
It's a
pipe.
mini
It's a pipe.
thing.
They
It's
smoke
such a long.
There you go.
Oh,
You're
no,
right.
that's
It's
just
a pipe.
thing.
And what would they smoke in the pipe?
Ask him to pass.
Tobacco.
Oh
Okay.
my god.
Why is the pipe so long?
So you can
Okay,
fit a lot of tobacco in it.
To get more cigarette
you
butts
could-
in it.
No.
They're
Well,
easy.
this is long before cigarettes
No
weren't
cigarettes.
invented until about 1900. So nobody smoked cigarettes back then, and it's a good thing because cigarettes are particularly deadly.
They're
Whereas
disgusting.
pipes are not so
My
bad, you
uncle
can get
smokes and I
mouth
love smoking.
cancer and things, but you're not inhaling it, so you don't get lung cancer. But what happens when you burn tobacco there? What happens to this?
It becomes smoke.
Yeah, smoke. And when you burn something, what happens? It gets
Smoky.
and hot.
Oh, so maybe the longer the
it
pipe,
got so hot
that they had
That's
to have
to
a
let the
longer
smoke out
pipe
of
to
it.
keep it away from their
Right.
face.
So you could hold it back here while that was hot, and it would cool the smoke as it came down, so it wouldn't be hot smoke in your mouth. That's why they made them so long.
Can you pass it around?
Stop
I
asking
will
to
pass it around. Be careful with it. It's very fragile. All right.
Oh, so is it
Made
like
out
a
of
type of
clay.
It's gonna break.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Alana, you're gonna color it.
Okay. What's this?
Oh
What does that look like?
It's a rock.
Huh? A rock? What else? It's not a
Don't
rock.
touch me.
Anybody seen anything like that? No, a piece of a building. It's actually a piece of pottery, clay. Okay. Did native people make things out of clay like this, like pottery?
I don't want. Why did you ask?
Who used to make this? Indians or colonists?
Colonists.
Right. They had learned how to make pottery, but the native people didn't until the English people got here and showed them what to do. In fact, the native people would find stones called soapstone. It's a very soft stone, like sandstone. Thank you. And they would take a stone like this and then dig in the stone and make a big bowl, and then they dig around the outside and break it off. So they would make a bowl out of stone. Pretty clever, huh? I just saw the soapstone quarry that's over in Johnston, Rhode Island a couple weeks ago. But do you think you could use that as a tool? Yeah. Fits your hand, pretty easy to pound with. They made all kinds of
Maybe you
tools
could
out of
smush up the
stones.
leaves with that, too.
Pardon me?
You
You can
smush
pass it on. What's that?
smush up it with the leaves.
I can't hear you.
You can use like the rock and smush the leaves up.
Like make,
Smash leaves up,
like
right.
seasoning?
You can grind things.
You can make potpourri.
Yeah, they would take corn and grind the corn.
Isn't potpourri like a type of
Right.
like
Well,
like
that's
a
just
smelly-
a variety of fragrant kinds of leaves. You wouldn't eat potpourri. Yep,
I'm going back to
you
where-
forgot. So, the people who lived here survived for how long? How long did people live here?
over
Over
8,000
8,000
Over
years.
8,000 years. They survived and didn't destroy their environment. All right? How long have English people and Europeans been living here?
A long time.
A long time ago.
Still to
Well,
this
how
day,
long?
I assume.
You got a clue from the Pilgrims. What?
400 years.
400 years. Okay? 400 years versus 8,000. Who do you think has done a better job of surviving in a sustainable way and being good to the environment? Yeah, I think they have it all over us, don't you? Okay, we're doing a lousy job. We've got to learn how to live here without destroying our planet, right? Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
You can use rocks to hit the ground.
Yep. You can dig with rocks. You can do all kinds of things with rocks. Okay. And that was the tool that they had. And you know what the nice thing about having rocks as your tools?
There's so much of them.
There's so much so that when you move around, you don't have to take all your tools with you. You'll find more tools wherever you go. That's pretty clever, isn't it? Okay, I've talked to you long enough. If you'd like, let's get up and take a look. And I'd like some.
While memories of this land spark the fires of his spirit, lets the smoke rise in prayerful respect to Wampanoag, Massasoit, 8 Samisquan, Yellow Feather, esteemed leader of the Wampanoag Nation. His vision and 1621 treaty upheld 54 years of peace with early English settlers.
Thank you. Okay, so when you come over here, remember that if it weren't for the man who's buried here, we wouldn't be here. Pardon me?